Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Nadine Hoffman. I'm the Deputy Director at the International Women's Media Foundation, and I'm really delighted to be here with all of you today, and especially to our special guest today. We are celebrating the occasion of Kim Wall's birthday and her legacy here today with her friends and family members. As you can see on the screen, we have Kim's mother, Ingrid Wall, and brother, Tom Wall. We are also joined by some of our past and just announced awardees who you will be meeting in just a few moments. So thank you very much for taking the time to join with us today for what is really a very special event for the International Women's Media Foundation and for the Kim Wall Memorial Fund. We're going to begin today with a very short video remembering Kim's life, so we'll cue that now.
Hi, my name is Kim Wall. I'm currently in the middle of the Pacific on the Lady Eve, a Marshallese government supply ship, on my way back from Venezuela Castle, where I've been reporting on the nuclear waste sites threatened by climate change. This is exactly the kind of stories I like to do, where I can combine on the ground, shoe letter reporting with the foreign policy lens. Hopefully carve out a little space for myself in the male-dominated world that is foreign policy. Thank you.
Kim was an artist and a storyteller in every sense.
She seemed to be utterly and uniquely unafraid of going into uncharted territories.
She had wanderlust in droves, and it hung off her every word.
Kim had an infectious curiosity that was almost childlike in nature, full of innocence and goodwill.
She grabbed every opportunity she could. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Along the way, her life became an adventure.
The world through Kim's eyes was a rare and special perspective. She didn't shy away from tough questions.
My friend Kim wrote stories that transformed cultural anthropology into popular narratives.
She made going from continent to continent look like it was no big deal.
We complain often that journalism lacks creativity and depth, but Kim had so much of both.
She told human stories. In the same way she lived her life, she told them with grace, dignity, and joyous care for our shared experiences.
I remember when she told me about her upbringing. Both of her parents were journalists, and she had often accompanied them on small reporting trips. That's why she's so good, I thought.
Kim would have wanted more women out in the world, brushing up against life.
She gave voice to the weak, the vulnerable and marginalized people. That voice has been needed for a long time. Now it will not be.
That's always such a remarkable tribute to Kim's spirit and her legacy. And now I'd like to turn it to Tom Wall, Kim's brother, who is a part of the Kim Wall Memorial Fund Committee, to tell us a little bit more about Kim's reporting, her work, and her legacy. So Tom, to you, please.
So today, my sister Kim Wall would have turned 36. She only got to see 30. But she managed to fill that time with so much. To quote a famous adventurer, it's not the years, it's the mileage. And I actually happen to have Kim's boots with me today. They are well worn. She stood on a concrete tomb filled with nuclear sins on the Marshall Islands. She took a tour bus to the Sri Lankan battlefields. She showed off her nail-polished fingers to admiring girls in North Korea. She once got an offer to impersonate Margaret Thatcher by a Mao Zedong lookalike in Beijing. My sister had grit. She had a great talent, but she also had help. She was a master of the art of seeking and getting grants. And without those grants, Kim would not have been able to travel like she did. And that is why we are here today, to give the gift that was given to Kim to the next generation. Kim often spoke about shoe leather reporting, about the value of leaving the newsroom and going into the real world. For the last 5 years, we have had the privilege and honor to give out a grant in Kim's name. And this year, we are overjoyed to present that grant to Mahima and Aaron. May your shoes carry you safely on your travels. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tom. And in just a few moments, we will be having a chance to formally introduce you to Mahima and Aaron, who are this year's awardees. Just to share a little bit more about this very special fund, the IWMF, in partnership with Kim's friends and family, created the Kim Wall Memorial Fund to support women journalists around the world pursuing the kinds of stories that Kim herself loved and told, which you just heard a little bit about in the video. And as you could also tell from that video, she really took a unique approach to covering some of the subcultures around the world. Since 2018, we have awarded at least $5,000, but oftentimes more than that every year, to journalists, many of them freelancers like Kim, to carry forward the spirit of her reporting. Until today, we've awarded 11 grants, and today you are going to meet our 12th and 13th grantees, which we're very excited about. We do solicit open applications for this grant every year, and you can learn more about the fund on our website. We'll share that link in the chat box. And really, we want to just say thank you to the dedication of Kim's family for creating such an amazing legacy for their daughter. This amazing endowment that they've created will allow us to offer grants to journalists in perpetuity through the Kim Wall Memorial Fund. So we are going to now turn to a short video that's going to highlight some of our past Kim Wall grantees and the work that they've been able to do as a result of receiving the Kim Wall Memorial Fund grants.
As a previous grantee, I can tell you that the reporting I did with the Kim Wall Fund support was incredible.
It allows me to spend more time on one in-depth story and do more on the ground reporting, which doesn't happen a lot to freelancers in this media environment.
Thanks to the generosity of Kim's parents, Ingrid and Joachim, I was able to go on a reporting trip, which was so critical to my story.
The Kim Wall Memorial Grant was transformative for my reporting and helped me make not just one, but 2 international reporting trips. It was invaluable to have this grant, especially during a COVID year, and I could take all the precautions I needed and do all the reporting necessary on the ground.
Having time to spend with sources, really getting to know them, was a luxury.
I knew that was the beginning of my journalism career. IWMF gave me the wings to fly, and I am still flying.
The fund allowed me to write a story about people who are often ignored in the larger scheme of things, or whose stories are often told in fragments instead of as part of a larger whole. It was an opportunity that I'm incredibly honored to have had, and I hope that you would too.
All right. And I want to just say before we dive into today's discussion that we will have time at the end for questions and answers. You'll see in the Q&A box is a place where you can put your questions, and we will be keeping an eye on that so that we can have really a conversation together with you. So today we're thrilled to be joined by our 2020 Kim Wall Memorial Fund grantee, Mia Alberti, along with this year's 2 new awardees who you'll have a chance to meet a little later. Mia is a freelance multimedia reporter from Portugal, currently based in Brazil. And with the Kim Wall Memorial Fund grant, she was able to report on Brazilians fighting for their housing rights. In 2022, her report was published in Al Jazeera, and it was called Occupy to Survive. So Mia, I would love to invite you to tell us a little bit more about that reporting, what inspired you to do this story, and also to share with us a little excerpt just to give us a sense of what you uncovered.
Well, absolutely. Like you said, I was living in Brazil at the time, and I was covering a lot of inequalities. And this story is something that you cannot ignore when you are living in São Paulo, which is the biggest city in Latin America. And it is in the center of the city, the heart of the city is actually where most people that don't have housing end up having to live because it's close to their job. And they end up occupying these huge abandoned buildings, so-called vertical favelas or vertical slums. But the prejudice that exists against these people, which are majority Black and low-income people, is so big, and people think that they're just drug addicts and they're just thieves. And so I wanted, even for my own family that lives in Brazil, they thought this thing about these residents of these slums, and they are just common people like all of us that just need a place to live. So I wanted to tell their stories, and in Brazil the media is also not free of prejudice. So the Brazilian media covering this story has always been through the same lens of prejudice. So I wanted to do something different, and I wanted to just use my platform and my ability to write, to photograph, to video, and my connections with my existing clients like Al Jazeera, to be able to give the microphone to the residents and say, tell your story, tell your truth, and tell the world what you're doing. And of course, the grant made that possible because it is quite a costly production. And I wanted to spend as much time as possible with these people, because the idea was to open literally the doors to their houses and to their lives. And so without this grant, it would not have been possible, but not just on a monetary point of view, on a confidence point of view, which is something that freelancers, I think we go through a lot of confidence crisis, and that affects our reporting. So to have someone like an institution like the IWMF, and to have someone like Kim Wall's parents and the foundation believing that this story is worth it, just made me want to go and grab it. And then COVID happened. We had to postpone it for a while, but we have, I have a lot of updates. But like I said, the idea of these movements is to occupy these buildings and then turn them into official housing. So their idea is to make this place a home, and then show the authorities, look, if we manage to take this abandoned building and make it a home, make it official, then give it back to us as social housing. And that has been happening. So in that sense, I would like to just read a small quote. It's from one of the leaders of these occupation movements that they have been considered quite legitimate in the city, and the city itself is starting to recognize them. So this is one of them, from one of the buildings that has been turned into official housing. And the name of the building is called Hotel Lord. It used to be a hotel before it was abandoned and then occupied. The conquest of a building in the center of the city is very symbolic, he says. It represents the fall of taboos, prejudice, discrimination, the resistance to having poor people living closer to the middle class. FLM coordinator Osmar Borges, which is this character, remembers the day the Lord Palace Hotel was occupied. Families carrying their belongings queued to enter as volunteers handed out cups of coffee. Everyone fell silent in the abandoned building as police drove by on the street outside. Today, he proudly shows Al Jazeera the benefits of years of that fighting. Construction workers push wheelbarrows, the buzz of chainsaws echoes through empty halls, and electrical cords hang from ceilings, awaiting light bulbs for more than 170 apartments. We won the battle, he says. So this is the end of the quotation, and this is what it's all about. And this building, the Lord Palace Hotel, actually has people living on it now. officially as homeowners of these apartments. That's 170 apartments. The other building the other community I also featured in my reporting, called Prestes Maia. This was the biggest occupation in Latin America. So this was this massive building, two massive buildings next to each other that have been occupied for more than 20 years. The people living in it have been expelled many times. They always went back in, and it just became the example, the symbol of this type of fight. And after many years of fighting, the Prestes Maia, 1 or 2 months after I wrote my article, the authorities made it official. They signed an agreement with the occupation movements, and construction is now underway in Prestes Maia. I've been talking with some of the people that I interviewed that used to live there, and they've been posting pictures on social media of this building full of construction workers inside, and it's just so amazing to go from seeing this very rundown building, people living in not the best conditions, to now seeing the pride that they have in what they have conquered. And I think this project is so interesting because it opens up so many questions we talk about, and especially nowadays is so much more relevant than ever with the housing crisis across the world. We're seeing in Beirut, in Sao Paulo, in Paris, in Lisbon, in London, everywhere, in Washington, where housing is so expensive for the common Joe. And we have so many, in all cities have so many abandoned buildings. What is the point of it? So it creates, I think the project asks this amazing question, which is, do we respect private property, or we turn it into housing for the people that make the cities work? We're talking about these workers that have these jobs that make the city alive, that we need them to make the city alive. And the answer to that question, that at least what the occupying movements want to show, is that the answer to that question is yes, it is possible. If we, without any means, can turn these abandoned buildings to dignified and beautiful homes for the people that make the cities alive, then the governments should actually step up and do the same. So I just wanted to again thank the IWMF and Kim Wall's, Kim's parents, Kim's family. It's always so great to be here. And, I just hope that the new grantees feel the same confidence that this grant will give them to make their amazing projects a reality. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Mia. This is such a Kim story as you were talking about it, and just so incredible to hear the impact that has happened, and perhaps to even imagine that the reporting that you did helped to shape attitudes or to change people's minds about the housing. So are you continuing to cover these communities? Will you keep reporting on this issue? And what do you think is sort of the next big story here?
Yes, absolutely. I would actually love to do an update on the story, to actually do an article with an update on the story. And I forgot to say, one of the leaders of the movement has been elected in the last elections as state deputy, which is something between a senator and a congressman. So it's a big deal. So these people are really highly respected in their communities. I think with the change in administration in Brazil from a right-wing to a left-wing organization, we're going to see more of this. With the current housing crisis across the world, I think we're going to start seeing more of these things happening, not only of grassroots movements occupying buildings, like we are already seeing not only in Sao Paulo, but across the world, but also of governments having to put their head down and say, you know what, we have illegalized these kind of movements, but we have to recognize that without them, we cannot find dignified housing for everyone. So I think that's the growing trend with the current housing crisis, and I would love to explore it.
Thank you, Mia. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll come back in conversation maybe to hear some more about this work. And now I am very delighted to formally announce our 2 Kim Wall Memorial Fund 2023 awardees, who you've already heard their names. So first is Erin O'Brien. She's a freelance editor and journalist based in Turkey. And Erin writes for publications including Foreign Policy, Al Jazeera, and the New York Times. Her work focuses on human stories that reveal the true impact of violence and conflict. And the grant that Erin is receiving will support her reporting on Kurdish treasure hunting under Erdogan's rule in Turkey. I'm also going to introduce now our awardee, Mahima Jain, an independent multimedia journalist based in India. Her reporting addresses issues of inequality and social injustice, and she focuses on covering the stories of underrepresented groups. Her work has appeared in The Guardian, Scroll In, and the BBC, among others, and she is going to be reporting with her Kimwal Memorial Fund grant on India's vanishing women workers. So now we're going to have a chance to hear a little bit more from Erin and Mahima. Erin, I'd like to turn to you first to tell us a little bit more about your story. The treasure hunting aspect certainly fascinated our selection committee, and just a unique story. So tell us more. What is this all about?
Yeah, sure. Well, first off, thank you to IWMF and thank you to Kim's family, to Ingrid, to Joachim, to Tom. This means an incredible amount. It's not very common that journalists, and specifically female journalists, get this kind of support and this kind of recognition, and it means quite a lot, both in terms, as was mentioned, monetarily and also in terms of confidence. So I've lived in Turkey for the better part of 10 years. A lot of my reporting has been focused on state-sponsored violence, on the aftermath of war and conflict, most recently on the earthquake. My specialty in terms of reporting is in the eastern part of the country. So a lot of that has focused on the conflict with Kurdish militant groups, on the Syrian refugee crisis, on the ongoing conflict in Syria, cross-border issues, etc. But I always found when I was out there that there was this like buzz of kind of a thing that people talked about, which is treasure hunting. And so it was always like on that list of stories that I wanted to do. And so this region in the eastern part of Turkey is kind of a quilt of different cultures. So it was kind of the seat of the Armenian Empire. It was the site of the Armenian genocide. It has been empires after empires have come, conquered, left this area. So you have these layers of history and civilization. And that, especially in a state that denies, for example, violence against non-Muslims, violence against Armenians, that denies the Armenian genocide, that's a very difficult thing to grapple with. So people grapple with it in different ways, especially now the Kurdish communities that lived on this land that were participated in perpetuating the Armenian genocide that are now experiencing a form of genocide themselves. And so one of the ways that people, so you can hear the call to prayer in the background, I'm so sorry. One of the ways that people grapple with this is through these antiquated sites that aren't necessarily recognized and protected, but are kind of like in the middle of their lives. So like you'll have a city or like a toilet or like whatever, and then there's a grave or there's a church or whatever. And so that's one part of the story, which is this means of grappling with history. The other part of it is that this part of the country is so desperately poor, like just no jobs. People are mostly migrant workers. They come to Istanbul, they come to Ankara, and they see when they come to Istanbul and Ankara this wealth that people have, and they see people like President Erdogan, who has risen from abject poverty to just intense wealth, much of it through kind of like selling cultural heritage. And so the treasure hunting in these areas kind of operates almost like a kind of lottery. So everyone's after the treasure, and everyone sees the treasure as their ticket to success. And there are people who find treasure, but more of it is this whole like world that's been constructed around the treasure hunting. So there's fake mediums who pretend that they're embodying the ghosts of Armenians who told them where the treasure was hidden for 200 lira. There are people who pretend to be imams with the stones that tell you where the treasure is, all that kind of stuff. And I think broadly, like a lot of the stories that I try to do, this very weird seeming story that feel like a non-local eerie, like treasure hunting, that's something of the past, that's something that pirates do. Like this is like a very kind of hard to believe but real way of grappling with this immense kind of political suppression and economic suppression that these regions experience, and that basically the only way that these people can conceive of making it out of their current situation is by some kind of like mystical or magical intervention. And that is the treasure hunting. But then on the real front, they go out on digs, they dig in graves, they dig in Armenian graves, they find stuff. There's a whole secondary market. They sell things to Bulgaria, they sell things to Georgia, things are smuggled across. There are these like mystical Armenian and Jewish figures that kind of act as the middlemen to sell these things, to collect these things and sell them. And then the final thing I'll say is that I think that there's a really important question in Turkey these days, especially as we're grappling with the aftermath of an earthquake that officially killed almost 60,000 people and likely killed more than 200,000. And we are coming up an election on May 14th that will determine the future. I'm so sorry. Determine the future of Turkey. And I think that we're going to begin to have to dig out of like the rubble of 2 decades of rule by the conservative AKP party and the corruption that has meant. And one of the things that they've done is, privatize and sell a lot of historical sites and historical material and all that kind of stuff. And so this story is at the highest level also a way of grappling with like, what has these 2 decades of rule meant for people, for these sites, these pieces of history? How much has been sold? How much has disappeared? How much has been allowed to disappear? And also how much have people begun to forget these things and the reality of these things and instead view them as a way of getting rich, which is the mentality that the government possesses. So it's a bit of a complicated story, but I think that often in Turkey, as a very complicated country and a large country that is kind of in the middle of a lot of things, it is boiled down to the politics and the people in charge and these 3-letter words and parties and all that kind of stuff. And I think that it's really important to tell the individual stories of the people who end up being caught in the crosshairs of these political and social and economic changes. And that's what I hope to do with this story. And so, yeah, I'm going on a 3-week treasure hunt in June. And then I'll be with a photographer and a guide, safely. And then I'm going to some markets in Bulgaria and Tbilisi where these things are actually smuggled across, but then legally sold in July. So we'll see how things go.
Fascinated to hear about your progress. And Erin, you mentioned the impact of the devastating earthquake that happened recently. Mm-hmm. I mean, tell us how that affected your ability to be able to report this story and what impact it's having on the communities that you're going to be covering.
Sure. So in Van itself, in Argeş, sorry, I should have mentioned this. So the place where I've initially done most of this reporting is in the northeast of the country near the Iranian border. So that's pretty safe and pretty unaffected, though that region did have an enormous earthquake in I'm so sorry, I don't remember the exact year, but it has also experienced really widespread earthquakes. But I think that there is this same problem is not limited to this area. This kind of like antiquity search, trade, and smuggling extends to the eastern coast and extends to the western coast, and it extends especially to the southeast of the country as well, where the earthquakes were, which is a lot of Kurdish and Roman and Byzantine history. So I hope, as I told you guys, to expand the story to explore how potentially, for example, archaeologists not being allowed to access the Hatay Archaeological Museum still. Like, where are those pieces? What has happened to the inside of the museum? Or today, like, people have just begun digging out artwork. So where is all this stuff going to go? So that's a question that I'll also ask. And I think at a higher level, the earthquake goes to show how completely abandoned people in these Eastern Kurdish and poorer parts of the country have been by this government, and that their stories are really important, precisely because the government, unfortunately, does not view their lives quite as valuably as they do others. So that's why I feel even more so like this is an important story to tell, because the suffering that is indicated by this desperation to find treasure, I feel is a narrative of what it means to live under a government that basically doesn't view you as fully human.
Such an incredible story, Erin. We're so excited to see what you produce and to follow along your journey with you. And we'll come back when we come to the Q&A shortly to ask some more questions. But next, I would love to turn to Mahima and to hear a little bit about your project. You talked about wanting to bring more light to voices of rebellion, carrying Kim's legacy forward. So I'd love to know, first of all, how you plan to do that, and also just what it means to be looking looking for the missing women in India and how you plan to approach what sounds like a really important and daunting assignment.
Hi, everyone. Good day. Thank you, Nadine, and thank you so much to the Wall family, Tom, Ingrid, and Queen. As a freelance journalist, I rely extensively on fellowships and grants, so to do on-ground reporting. So thank you very much. To be connected with Kim's legacy and to do the kind of journalism she did, and to do this, to find these undercurrents of rebellion, as you said, is in India, when you talk about women, they are missing from the workforce. In the 1990s, we had 30% female workforce participation, and it has dropped to as low as 17% today. So there are 450 million women who are eligible, who can work, of a working population, but only 17% of that are in the workforce. So in my reporting, I am planning to look at four different sectors in different geographies. So this includes India's large booming gig economy. This includes, India has a huge internal migration wave. And if you notice, often the people in this wave of migration are often men. So, but however, a large number of women are migrating as well, and they face barriers in just the process of migration can be really hard, because the state does not have, until the 2020 lockdown, when we really saw the extent of migration in India, we did not, I mean, Indians weren't even acknowledging the fact that their cities and their prosperity was on the shoulders, sweat, blood, and tears of these migrant families. So, one of the projects I will be doing is looking at the women in this equation who work largely in the informal labor sector, as construction workers, as cleaners, as domestic workers, and they have no benefits, no security. Sometimes they're exploited. I mean, most of the time they are exploited. So the idea is to look at, to find these faces, to find these people on ground in areas like Bombay, Delhi, and Bangalore, which are three of the largest cities, while also combining it with rural reporting to kind of look at the whole wave of how it happens, what is the exploitation that happens through the process. So that's another, that's one story that I will be pursuing as part of the Kim Wall Memorial Fund grant. The other story is India also has willing unemployment, which is women choose not to work. And in the census shows that there is this problem, and nobody has actually ever investigated it and looked at why are educated, and these are educated women often. So looking at what are these communities and why is this happening? Why do they give up the right to work? And so the idea is to look at the socioeconomic and cultural factors behind this, which is the systemic patriarchy that keeps them behind from and keeps them away from the from participating in economic prosperity and economic growth. This also includes things like care work and unpaid labor around the house. Just give me a second. The other story I was hoping to look at is women in business. India has a large small and medium-sized business communities. A lot of it is informal, a lot of it is what we call medium and small enterprises. And there are programs which are run to teach women how to be business people, but these programs ironically take the male viewpoint of what a business should be like and put it on women, ignoring, and these are run by some of the largest educational institutions in the country, and they kind of forget the fact that women have different needs, strengths, and they offer different things. The idea is to follow some of these business women and see what have they found? What kind of learning has India's higher education systems given them, or what kind of tools they have been provided to move forward and create these businesses? Throughout this, the aim is to kind of look beyond education as this excuse for India having low workforce participation. This is the story that we have been told over and over again, that we are behind because of lack of education or opportunities. The idea is to show, report after report has shown, the data shows that India probably has right now the highest education level among women in comparison to what it did in the last several decades. So then why is this happening? Why are women being systematically left out of our workforce? Kim had this uncanny ability of finding this face of a normal person going on the ground and using that person's life to kind of set context to the national level or global level, as she says in that video, event or policy or movement. And this is exactly what I hope to do. In one of my stories in the past, a woman farm worker who used to work 18, 20 hours a day told me that no one knows about me because I don't earn. So, and in her home, because she was working on her farm and on her family farm. And the other thing is, she was a graduate, she was educated. Then what was happening that is keeping millions of women like her behind? So that's what I hope to do, to find those invisible and missing women and to tell their stories and their struggles, and to kind of highlight the contexts in which they are kept behind, like how is the system being unjust to them. And once again, thank you to the Wolf Foundation and IWMF for believing in this project. And I really think this is going to help me do some very important work in placing women at the center of our discussions in India about what they mean to the economy.
Incredible. Thank you, Mahima. And it sounds like you're doing 3 reporting projects in one from what I just heard you describe. We're really looking forward to this reporting as well. It's so important. Such different stories that we've heard about today, all 3 completely different contexts and sort of issues, but all I think do really reflect the spirit of Kim's legacy. So it's amazing to hear a little bit more from each of you today about this work and this reporting. We are going to open it to Q&A for our last few moments here together. And so I do encourage you to use the Q&A box. I see that some questions are coming in. So I'm going to go ahead and take some questions from the audience today. And thank you again for those of you who are able to join us to celebrate Kim's legacy on her birthday. And so I have one for you, Mahima, just to start, picking up on what you're just talking about how women's participation in the workplace has changed under the current Prime Minister Modi, if it has improved or worsened under his administration.
Thank you, Taylor, for that question. So it has worsened over the last few years, and in this last year, it kind of picked up again, is what I'm reading from our government data. It dropped down to 17, according to ILO figures in 2019, and now it's picking up. But what is interesting is the framing of the work itself, which the government does. Now they are trying to include unpaid care work as work and kind of show, but in that case, it is actually exploitation of women because they don't earn anything. The other issue, I'm not saying the government is trying to do that, but there are proponents of this, on the right-wing side to kind of include that so it looks better. The other issue is also, for example, in 2019, the government actually had pink economic budget to reflect the improvement of women's participation in the workforce, which was ironic because one of the things it kind of lauded was this feminization of agriculture. And in fact, one story which I did with IWMS support was actually debunk this feminization of agriculture and show that through the lives of women farm workers, that they are working more, but they're not getting anything. There is no economic freedom. And in fact, there is just more and more exploitation. So I would say it has decreased, it is fluctuating, but a lot of it has also got to do with definitions and the way they kind of frame it.
Thank you, Mahima. And turning back to you, Erin, could you talk a little bit about how you've been able to bridge both cultural and language barriers when you're reporting, particularly in rural areas of Turkey?
Sure. And I just want to add, sorry, I forgot to say in this intro, I am doing this with the support of The Economist's 1843 magazine. They have committed to it, so I should have said that up front. So I fortunately, I speak fluent Turkish. So I am able to communicate without a translator, which is immensely helpful because a lot is lost in translation. And so that covers the language gap. I've also done quite a lot of work in these regions, so I've come to understand the Kurdish dialect of Turkish very, very well, and can understand, I speak Persian as well, so I can understand some Kurdish as well. But in terms of cultural barriers, I've found this very interesting phenomenon. I think I was telling Mahima about this. We met in Istanbul for a coffee a few weeks ago, but that in these regions, especially somewhere around Van, which is a very conservative Kurdish region. So there's like places like Diyarbakir, which are slightly less conservative. Van is very conservative Muslim. And I find that maybe it's because of I'm a bit taller than people tend to be in that region as well. And I don't cover my hair when I report, that I tend to fall into this like third category of person. So I'm not female by their definition of what a woman is. So I gain access to both female and male spaces in these reporting contexts. So for example, like these are the treasure hunters that I'm working with, they're like toilet attendants, kebab shop guys, like the garbage collector, like not people that necessarily I typically interact with in my everyday life here in Istanbul, but they've like very much invited me into their world. And showed me all this. And the other thing is that in Turkey, in almost all my reporting, I function through ties and trusted sources. So you kind of do that thread pulling where you find someone who you trust, who they trust, who they, it's like you can't just kind of cold call one of these guys. So the woman, there's a woman named Kubra who wrote a master's thesis on this that I found online, and she happens to be from this town. She is Kurdish. She is a practicing Muslim. And so she also introduced me to a lot of people. So then because she was a local person, then I was accepted as her friend. So then I was told the stories. And one thing I'll add is with this story, a big difficulty is that you never know when people are lying. But that's also a huge part of the story. So you kind of have to give credence to the lies because that is how people are telling their story. So even if you don't believe it, you have to tell their story. So you can fact check it later, but in a narrative piece like this, like the lie is what they're telling themselves. So you have to kind of go with it.
Fascinating. Thank you for sharing. Mia, I'm coming back around to you to ask what surprised you the most when you were reporting your story?
Let me just say, I want to read a book about Erin's and Mahima's stories because they're both so differently interesting. But I'm looking forward to your reports. What surprised me the most? Well, I think one thing that really did surprise me during my reporting when I was in pre-production after I published was the lack of information on the lack of attention that these movements that are quite big and quite legitimate have in Brazilian media. And I don't want to, be the foreigner pointing the finger at something from a country that is not mine, but it is in fact true. And even now preparing for today, I messaged some of the people I interviewed, and I was just, doing a quick Google search for news, the latest news regarding these places, these communities, these buildings, and there's nothing. But there's so much happening, but there's nothing on local media, which is so serious for me, and in my opinion, and it continues to just feed into these into these prejudice ideas that this Brazilian society have against not only the people in these occupations and living in slums, but everyone that is not white and everyone that is not well off. Brazil is such a divided society, and it really just, it roots from the history being colonized by my country 500 years ago, but also by ignorance, and people continue to not have access to information about these places. There's a huge gap in the reality that these two groups live in Portugal. You know, we can divide the society in the white, even middle class, or you know, well-off Brazilians, and then the low middle class, low income, and Black people from Brazil. They live completely different realities, and although the marginalized have access to the other half's lives, because they usually work for them, they're their drivers, they're taxi drivers, they're hairdressers, they're maids, so they're inside of their houses, they listen to their conversations. The other half does not have access to the reality of how Black low-income people live in Brazil. And you know, without reporting, without media attention, that's really going to continue to exist. But I think what surprised me the most, besides that, it's what made me do the story, which is just the fixed ideas that people have about a certain group of people that they have never met, they have never talked, they've never went inside of these buildings. However, they are entirely sure they know who these people are, how they behave, and how they live. And I think that's a great challenge for a journalist, when you come across something like this and you're like, oh my God, I have such a big opportunity here to actually bridge this gap and try to tell people that they're wrong, or that it's not really how it looks. So it's shocking, but it's one of those shocks that as a journalist makes your brain tingle with ideas like, this is a great story. We need to grab more attention. We need to have more attention on this topic.
Thank you, Mia. And speaking of great stories, we're going to take one final question, and actually I'd like to open it to everyone, which is just to come back to Kim and her own reporting, and to share, if any of you would like to, a favorite story of hers and why that story sticks with you. I don't know if anyone would like to answer on that, or even it would be great to hear from Tom and Ingrid as well, if you have any ideas.
Well, if no one is on, and of course Kim, Ingrid, and Tom will know the best, but I can't remember exactly the details, but I think for me the best one is the Tamil fighters from Sri Lanka, and it's such an out-of-the-box story that you think, how did she even discover this story? How did she even think about this story? And the way that she writes it is, like we heard on the video, she uses such creativity and originality. It's like she's painting the article with colors, and it's just super entertaining to read and informative at the same time. It's really the type of journalism everyone would love to do.
Thank you. I see we're putting the links to this story in the box. Any others we'd like to highlight?
Sorry, Mahima, you go ahead. Or my personal favorite is the Poison in the Tomb and all of the reporting from the Marshall Islands, because I think that something like nuclear testing is something that normally in our tiny pea brains, we don't really have the means of grappling or digesting, or dealing with, or trying to understand the consequences of. It's another one of those kind of terms that gets spoken about in the news. And so I think that, following a single family's journey in this part of the world that most reporters would not take the time or effort to go to, is just another example of this kind of intrepid shoe leather, but also engaging with foreign policy and with international politics reporting that made Kim such a great journalist. And it's the kind of work that I hope to do as well.
Thank you, Erin. Mahima, I think you have one too.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say, I at this point, I only have to add on to what Mia and Erin have said. Because the Sri Lanka story is one of my favorites too. And whenever I used to read, or even now go back to some of Kim's stories, it's just like how did she even think about it? Like, how did she even come up with it? And then how did she have the grit and the courage to go to this other country and just be one with the people and write about them? And it's such a delight to read her stories. And my favorite one, apart from the Sri Lanka story, is the one from the package, the weekly package, I believe it was called. And it was just so fantastic. It's such a close community, and she went into that community and told, and from the perspective of a guy who delivers a hard drive, she starts talking about like policies, telecom policies, and it just goes wider and wider, and at the same time more focused. And it was just, I mean, I was gripped throughout the story. I couldn't like, and honestly, when I was writing the application, I went back to it because it was just so fantastic. I mean, and you know what was also interesting in the story is she also started talking about these two boys who have grown up together and how one moves forward where the other kind of because of remittances. And that's again something so close to India somehow, you know, this whole idea of foreign remittances and how it makes like, you know, family prosperity because of it. So yes, that's my favorite story.
Thank you for sharing. For those who are with us today who maybe haven't had a chance to interact with all of Kim's reporting, you can find it on the Kim Wall Memorial Fund website. And I see that link is just being shared now. So really encourage you. One of the ways to keep her legacy alive is just to read the work that she did and to think about all the miles that she did cover in her lifetime, covering those incredible stories. I just want to open the floor to Kim's family for any final words of, you know, congratulations or advice or any wisdom you'd like to share with our grantees who are with us today. And I see Mia has her hand up. Yes, please go ahead, Mia.
No, after Ingrid and Tom.
Okay. And I don't want to put you on the spot, Ingrid or Tom, just if you had any final words, I wanted to make space.
Thank you very much, all of you, for taking part of this, because the fund is for us very, very important. It's a way for us to keep Kim's legacy alive. So thank you.
Thank you. Mia, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that if you suffer from imposter syndrome, which is my case, and I thought that my story was not good enough at all to get the grant, and if you think your story is not good enough, apply. That's it.
That's wonderful advice. I want to say congratulations again to Aaron and Mahima, and thank you to everyone for joining us today to celebrate Kim's birthday, to celebrate her legacy, her life, her reporting. And we really just are so grateful to have you all as part of our family and to be part of the Kim Wall Memorial Fund family. So congratulations and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you
all.